Okay guys, a couple of my wonderful subscribers asked for a sharpening tutorial. So I figured that I would just get that out of the way before I pursue with some other projects that I have coming up on the channel, so stay tuned for that. Disclaimer, just because this is the way that I sharpen does not mean it's the way or the best way to sharpen. I've heard lots of people say, 60 seconds to get your knife scary for sharpening. It's possible, but it's just best to find the way that works best for you. So I'm going to show you how I like to sharpen my knives. So what you're going to need are oil stones of various grit. I have 3 right here. I don't know what the number grit are. This is the one that I'll start with, medium, and ultra fine. You will need some oil lubricant of some kind. This is the good stuff, if you know what I'm saying. And a leather strop with some stropping compound on it. This is a strop block that I made ages ago. You can use a loose strop as well. One of those was shown in my straight razor case video, so go and check that out. And last but certainly not least is a knife. This is one of the knives that I made a little while ago. And the reason that I'm sharpening it, I haven't used it, is because I accidentally dropped it on the hard concrete floor of my shop. And it made me very sad. So I'll resharpen it and get that edge back to nice and hair shaving sharp. So let's do an overview of what sharpening is, so that way we all understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. So actually, instead of showing it on this, I'll use the poor man's whiteboard, piece of cardboard. So if this is our knife edge, looking at it this way, or this is the knife blade, I should say, and then these are the bevels. So if that's the bevel, there should be a secondary edge at a steeper angle right here. That's the cutting edge. You can see, I'll try and get you guys to be able to see it. That part where it's really shiny right at the edge, that's the cutting edge. And this is the bevel. So, the goal of sharpening is to just polish this secondary edge, or the cutting edge, as high as you can. The higher it's polished, the sharper it'll be. Now, there is what's known as a jagged edge and not a sharp edge. Jagged edges feel very sharp, but they rip, they don't cut. And one of the ways that you'll be able to tell is by running your fingernail, not your finger, across the edge. Like right now, glassy smooth until I get to the tip where I dropped it. Right, glassy smooth. That is a sharp edge. A jagged edge will cut and tear into your fingernail. That's not what we want. So, now that's out of the way, we'll move on to some procedural topics. First, pick your stone of choice. I'm going to be doing some relatively rough grinding to get this cutting edge back to perfect condition, if that's possible. So take my stone, put it in my block that I made. The block isn't necessary, and you can use whatever stones you have. And then you just throw some oil on it. Well, WD-40 isn't oil, but you get the point. And then you take your knife, and this is where most people get intimidated, is they don't know how to match the angle of the cutting edge to the stone. And I'll tell you a trade secret. It doesn't have to be perfect. Okay? You can essentially grind a whole new cutting edge on the sharpening stone if you mess up a little bit. It's not hard. So don't be too intimidated. Now obviously if you go to the extremes this way or the extremes this way, then you'll start having problems. But if once you get the basic idea, and I'll go over a couple tips to just get the basic idea, and then this is what the general motion is like. And I'll go over a couple of different motions later. So I'll show you guys a close-up view of what that should look like and how to find the ideal angle. Alright, I've got you guys closer to the stone so you can see what's really going on. And on those few strokes that I did in the general overview, you might not be able to see it very well, but I actually got pretty lucky and guessed the angle almost perfectly. Now, how I can tell that is because the cutting edge right now is not nearly as shiny as the edge that I haven't sharpened yet. The edge that I haven't sharpened yet is still a mirror finish, which is what we want. But because this matte scratched finish goes all the way to the edge, I know that I got the angle right, except for in this little section right here. But that's easy. So I will just try, and locking your wrist is a skill that just takes time to develop. I've been sharpening knives for a very long time in comparison to my lifespan. So once you get the angle down, do a couple passes, just rocking it back and forth without fluctuating your wrist this way. And sometimes, for beginners, it's nice to just do one pass instead of going back and forth, because this just generates more risk for you to unlock your wrist. And then wipe it off so we can see what's going on the edge. And now you can see, I don't know how well you'll be able to see, it's awfully bright in here, but there's still a little section right here where I need to keep sharpening. But everything else looks fine. And even if you didn't match the angle perfectly with the one that you made on the first couple passes, on the coarser stones, that doesn't really matter a whole lot, because you'll just grind to that new angle anyways. So sometimes, even if you know your angle isn't perfect, it can be best to just hunker down and keep grinding on the stone, and eventually you will end up with a fresh cutting edge. So I'm just going to take that little section that I didn't get and polish it up. And here is where you tell whether or not your angle went all the way to this edge right here. So when you're grinding this way, what you're doing is moving the metal that's on the edge. You're just moving it. I mean, obviously a little's coming off, you can tell because the oil that we're using is getting darker. But if your grind goes all the way to the edge, you should feel what's called a burr on this side. And let me move you guys again so that way I can demonstrate on the poor man's whiteboard what a burr is. Alright guys, so we're back with our lovely whiteboard here. And we'll just get rid of that. The new section. So what a burr is if this is our, we'll zoom way in. If this is our cutting edge, this is our cutting edge, and we'll say that those are the bevels, but we don't really need to worry about that. When you're grinding, let's say that you're grinding or sharpening on this side, what you're doing is you're moving the metal this way, right? And what it does is it wants to stay attached, so it curls up and forms a little curl, right? So on your edge you have little, it's called a burr or a roll that you can feel, and it's directional, right? Since I was sharpening this way, the burr will be on this side of the knife, and I can feel it with my thumb. And if I come over here and do the same thing, there's no burr. It's a little bit hard to explain what it feels like, but you should just be able to tell. And sometimes the burr is bigger than others, and sometimes the burr is uneven. If it's uneven, or if it's too small, then just sharpen again at the same angle that you were. And then how we'll get rid of the burr is we'll sharpen on the other side. I'll bring you guys back in so I can show you how to do that. Alright, so now that I have established that there is indeed a burr all along this edge, what I will do is I will now flip the knife over and repeat the exact same process as I was when I was sharpening this way. So I typically like to stabilize with some of my fingers. Some people just have the wrist control to not do that. I find it's helpful. And I basically just do the exact same process in the opposite direction. What that does is it pushes the roll back over to this side. So you'll be able to feel the roll once you've completed sharpening on this side. But before then, I will check to see if my angle is right. And here's what I wanted to show you guys. My angle was not correct. If you can see, the edge line is bisected long ways, which means that my angle was too far. Let me show you guys with my hands. My angle was too far this way, right? I don't know if you guys can see that. My angle was too far this way. So what I'll do the next time I go to the stone is I'll bring that angle back up this way until I get it right. It's essentially a giant game of cat and mouse with really sharp objects. And so I'll bring my angle up from what it was last time. That's just muscle memory. You'll build it over time. And just do it again. And because I know that I'm close, I will probably just keep grinding at this angle until I reach the edge, as opposed to flipping it back over and checking, and because that can just take time, and sometimes I don't want to take a whole lot of time when I'm sharpening. You can also do short little choppy strokes. This is easy on small knives, as opposed to, this is a pretty small knife, as opposed to big ones. You can do short little choppy ones, although it's harder for beginners to maintain that wrist angle. So I like to just teach people to just do it this way. Alright, so I have successfully transferred the burr over to the other side of the knife all along the edge, which is good, and all of the chipping and rolling and damage, actually it wasn't any chipping, it was just rolling, that was done at the tip when I dropped it, has been removed. So this is now the hard Arkansas stone. This was the stone I was using before. My stones aren't labeled, but I use them so much so I just know what they look like. It's typically a good idea to keep your stones labeled. So I'll just do the exact same thing that I did with the coarser stone. And that stone wasn't very coarse. You can tell by the noise it made when I sharpened. And I will repeat the exact same process of flipping the burr back over to the other side. Now, what moving up in grit does is it polishes it. It polishes the cutting edge to a higher grit, or to a higher finish, which, like I said on the poor man's whiteboard, is the goal of sharpening. Which is why you just move up in grit and not sharpen on a 240 grit stone and call it a day. Alright guys, I finished on the hard Arkansas stone, have a burr, completed all the steps. And normally on any knife that I produce that you see on the channel, I stop there. I move on to the stropping block and I call it a day. And that gets me a very good edge. But this knife, I want to be really, really crazy sharp. And so I don't know what grit this stone is. It's more than 10,000. I know that for a fact. It's a very high grit stone. And so because I want this knife to be super sharp, I will use this stone and then the stropping block. And I'm paranoid about this stone, so I will clean it off with some denatured alcohol. Use that for everything. Just to make sure that there's no dust and particulate that'll scratch up my lovely fine edge that's on the stone when I try to sharpen it. Sometimes you can feel on your sharpening stone when there's a little piece of stone dust or something that gets in the way. You can feel it and it makes this horrible crunching, scratching sound, and it puts a big scratch in your edge that you're trying to polish. And so it's important to clean off your stones, especially the high grit ones, like this one. Get that out of the way. And once that dries off completely, which it almost is, there we go. We will repeat the exact same process. And I used very little oil on this stone because this stone is about as absorbent as that off-brand toilet paper that schools use. So you don't need very much oil, or in this case WD-40. So then you just repeat the process. I don't know if you guys will be able to hear it over the sound of the furnace running in the background, but this stone is a very high grit. It just whispers. It doesn't even scrape, it just whispers. And you shouldn't need very many passes on this stone because it's just so fine. And the finish that this stone gives the cutting edge is almost as shiny and mirror polished as it is after I strop it. So that's how I know that this stone is very, very high grit, because it's almost a mirror, whereas the other two stones left it pretty opaque as opposed to nice and mirror shiny. Alright, I am finished with this stone. Be sure to wipe all the oil off of your stone after you're done using it. Maybe get a fresh paper towel every once in a while. Use the one with the denatured alcohol on it. Waste not, my friends. Wasting is not good. Alright, now that that's nice and clean, we will move on to the stropping block. This is the final step in all of your sharpening processes, or it should be. Stropping blocks are amazing. They're super easy to make. I'm just using leather. I've seen people use cardboard. You can use jeans or denim material. Anything that holds the compound. I'll pull you guys over to the vise so I can set this up and show you how I load it up and how to use it. Alright guys, we're over at the vise. We have our stropping block in it. Suede side up. This is a double-sided one. This is the smooth side. I don't use it very often. It's just not necessary for most things. So what we'll do, this has a fair amount of compound in it already, but I'll put some more in just to show you guys. What I use on this strop is the Flex Cut compound. This came with their stropping set thing. I don't know what it is. It's great. I just started using it. As you can see, it's worn down a little. It's awesome. However, I do have some white compound, which I believe is higher grit than the yellow, and some red compound, which I don't like very much. It just sort of smears all over the place and doesn't cut very well, so I don't use this hardly ever. So I'll just take the compound and I'll just start where it's worn off, and I'll just rub it into the leather or denim or cardboard, whichever you want to use. Alright, that should be good enough. And then all of the steps that we did when we were sharpening, keep them, except the direction that you pull the knife. If you sharpened by starting here, going that way, start here and come towards you. Now, the reason you want to do this is because you go this way and you'll cut your leather and you've ruined your strop. So by going backwards, maintaining the same angle that you sharpened on, keeping your wrist nice and locked, and make sure that you're going along the whole cutting edge of the knife. Excuse me. Do this however many times you want, honestly. I like to do it quite a few, and then you can see if I can get you guys to see it. That edge is now a mirror polish, as opposed to this one, which is a near mirror polish. So, and I have the skills to just do it quite fast. You can also do the stropping in short, choppy strokes, if you so choose. Just make sure that when you're doing short, choppy strokes, you're still getting all the parts of the edge. And then after I've done that for a little bit, flip it over and do the exact same thing, just backwards. And so what the strop does is it polishes to a higher grit than the sharpening stone will, and because it's a little bit flexible, leather has some give to it, it's not hard like a stone, it eradicates the burr on your edge, so you won't feel a burr on either side, which is good because the burr often gets in the way when you're trying to cut something. Obviously on the microscopic scale, you won't actually be able to tell very much. Alright, that should be good enough. let's grab some testing mediums and see if we did a good job. Alright, so we have our knife and a piece of paper. Now, paper is the most common medium that people use to test how sharp their knife is. It's not the best, but it's common and it's easy and it's cheap. So, as you can see, we have a pretty sharp knife. One of the ways you can tell is because the edge that it left on the paper isn't super ragged. This isn't straight razor sharp, obviously. It's not a straight razor. The straight razor that I do have, it eats paper like air. It's nothing. But for the purposes of this knife, see if I can get a decent cut going. It's sharp enough. I'm also just bad at cutting paper for some reason. There we go. And what you don't want to do when you're testing your knife on paper is stab it and do that, because typically that's not a good reflection of how sharp it actually is. It's more of just a tear. If it's nice and sharp, it should bite into the paper like that. Get this off the bench. Now, the better medium to test it on is your hair. Now, I mean, I don't know if you guys will be able to tell the difference on camera. I am right-handed, and so I always test the hair on my left arm. I don't have any hair left on my left arm because I've done it so many times. So, we will try not to cut ourselves like we did there and see if it shaves the hair off. Oh yeah, sure enough. Let me make sure that you guys are able to see that. So, as you can see, there's some hair on the blade, which is good, and there's not much hair left on the arm. So, this knife is sharp enough. I would send this knife out to a customer with this sharpness condition, because honestly, it doesn't need to be any sharper than that. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you want to see more tutorials, let me know in the comments. There's lots of other ways to sharpen than the way that I just showed you guys, or if you have any questions, let me know, and I will do my best to help you out. Thank you so much.